She felt nothing but a roar in her ears, like staring into a headwind on the spine. Tears streamed from her face. Darren found herself letting out a wild, exultant scream.
And welcome to the Reign of Books podcast, the reader's entry into great narratives. I'm John Keel, joining you from the War Room. And with me is my co-host Josh, joining you from the Hyrule Cube. Josh, how's it going tonight?
Hey, John. Pretty good, man. We are at the very end of our book, and this is exciting whenever we conclude a book. So I'm pretty excited about tonight's show. And the last part of any book, we usually see some of the author's best writing, and Leviathan is no exception. So how are things going on your end?
They're going great. Let me apologize to the viewers or listeners for not starting last night like we normally would. I had a very sick little one I had to take care of, so I'll apologize for that. But we're not going to falter. You will get your podcast because the written page reigns supreme, and we love talking about sci-fi and fantasy here on this podcast. And Leviathan, this is probably going to be a war between you and me tonight, I think, right? Some things I didn't like, some things you did like.
No, not necessarily. The beginning quote kind of says it all for me. I let out a big scream at the end, and I had tears on my face, and not necessarily tears of joy. So tonight, the conclusion of our World War I alternate reality young adult novel by Scott Westerfield. It is a young adult novel. The last third of the book saves the best part of the war for last. That is the actual parts of the war that we see. The Clankers and the Darwinists join forces and cultures to survive their frozen prison, and the inevitable attack by the Germans puts our heroes in some real life and death danger. We find out what happens when giant hydrogen-filled airships don't pay attention to Fire Safety 101. And it would seem that Darren is either a little crazy or just young and impulsive. And secrets that have been building up throughout the book are saved until the very next book. And John, that's why I was crying and screaming at the end of the book. Because frankly, there's too much that's left unsaid, too many secrets that are built into the beginning and kind of create the backbone of the story that just don't get answered. So before we jump into that, we're going to start with some news.
All right. First news story we want to talk about is actually coming from USA Today about Twitter fiction, a Twitter fiction fest, and they're basically giving novels or giving you pieces of novels one tweet at a time. And as you know, what is that? It's only 140 characters, right? For Twitter.
140.
Right, these authors are going to be feeding readers whole novels one tweet at a time, which is it's pretty interesting. And I think in other circumstances, or earlier in life, I would have said that's ridiculous. I will definitely want to read more than 140 characters at a time when I'm reading a book. But considering how many people are on Twitter, they're probably going to get a large viewership or readership, I would think. So. And the story goes through and lists some different authors that are going to jump on board. But what I wanted to note was who was actually sponsoring this or teaming up with Twitter. You got Penguin Random House, the Association of American Publishers, and USA Today. Obviously, USA Today is trying to sponsor it. This reminds me a lot. I think we have another story about the serialized fiction. But
yes, John, this is not serialized fiction. This is serialized ADD. I'm not extremely Twitter savvy. I use it professionally, but not personally. So I don't have this compelling itch to go and check out who I'm following. If it is someone famous, if it would be a writer that wrote a book on Twitter, and that stream was updated frequently, and it could be something that I could read for more than 10 minutes. Which I don't know if is the case. So they've proven this is successful. They did it, I think, last year. But the bottom line is, I'm just not sure about it, even in a form factor. I don't want to get onto my Twitter app and read it, just a little individual post. So depending on how it looks, depending on how it reads, this could be compelling. And Twitter obviously is going for the second run about it, but I don't know, man. It's 140 characters, and it's I don't know, unless you have kind of an easy way to slice it up. There's all kinds of technical limitations. Not to get into the whole user interface issue, but it's like, okay, oh, did I go over 140? Oh, I split my sentence. You're not going to have 140 character sentences. You're going to split your sentences. So that in itself, I think, is a kind of a cop-out, and I'm making a big guess here, but they're going to split up their sentences here.
Well, see, I don't really think this is about you, the reader, as much as it's about, say, a publishing house like Penguin Random Publishing being able to, at no cost to them, this costs them nothing, being able to figure out what stories people want to read. So if they're putting out little bits of stories here and they're figuring, hey, this one got a lot of views, this topic seems to interest people, then they'll keep going with it, and it costs them nothing to do this. And then ultimately...
Breaking news, John. You just said that publishers will crowdsource our content for free and see what works. No marketing, research, R&D required. So you're doing the work for the publisher. Yet another example of the big technology companies crowdsourcing our free content, which I think I'm one of those. I'm one of those people who just kind of on principle hates that concept. Excuse the H word.
But it's going to work. I think this is going to work. That's why. I mean, I agree with your take on it, but to be positive about it, this is going to work.
And segueing right into the serialized fiction story, it is a different concept, well, a semi-different concept. It's about reading in small little bits. This is about the reader. And this is about a new app called Rooster. And Rooster got covered by a few different outlets, Washington Post, the Huffington Post, a lot of different posts. So basically, Rooster is going to allow you to read books in 15-minute increments. It's like a reminder. Hey, do you want to read this morning? And so this gives busy people in their lives to read ebooks on their mobile devices. And so it's just like the natural progression of how do you meet readers where they are at. So I thought this was interesting because it has some big backers. It got some media coverage because I think there's a startup venture capitalist behind it. And so it's not especially novel. It's just the natural progression of how to get people to read, to consume, books like they do any other media on their devices and not be daunted by 500-page books. I'm not sure exactly what it offers me, different from what I'm already doing on my reading apps. Frankly, it's kind of saying, okay, you can do this. It's like your little digital assistant buddy who encourages you to say, you can get through this portion today. You really want to read, and we're going to help you do it. So I'm not being cynical. I'm just a little skeptical about what really this can allow for users, and who's getting the money, who's getting the kickback. We'll steer clear from there. But right now, it is about publishers making agreements with Rooster, what stories, what books will be available, and will people want to read the selections that they offer. I think it's highly curated, and that's kind of the story in a nutshell. Serialized fiction.
Well, see, I love the whole concept of serialized fiction because I almost feel like you go back to your roots. When the novel first started. Not that all of them are serialized, but since we're talking about sci-fi and fantasy, I go back to like H.G. Wells stories, which I think came out as chunks in newspapers. And how great are those stories? And so Rooster clearly, it sounds as though the whole book needs to be done, and then it's going to give it to the reader in chunks. But I wonder if an author could write a chapter every week and then push it to Rooster, or if a publisher would work with them that way. And I wonder if it couldn't kind of revive the whole serialized novel thing.
Yeah, you're right.
I would love that.
It was interesting. They said because of the cost of books, one of the articles mentioned this is how 19th century publishing took place. People were able to afford a little bit at a time this pulp fiction, and it was cheap, and people digested it that way, and that's kind of how stories used to be done. So it's kind of a resurgence in that area. And the counterpoint is, will people be willing to wait for a chapter a week? And with today's media on demand, when you binge on whole series in a weekend for Netflix, will people be able to sit here and make money off of serialized fiction? yeah, there's probably a market out there. I mean, like you said, there's probably a market, people who are busy and say, okay, this is awesome, and they'll sit there and wait for it, like a weekly episode on network television, just making all these comparisons of other media, and they'll be like, oh, this is great, and they can maybe recap on the previous chapter, and it kind of is a slow burn, and we don't need to kind of, I guess, dismiss that. You got to have a slow burn sometimes. Patience is still a virtue, right?
Absolutely, and I think if they do serialize a novel, can't speak right this morning. I think this works really well for me. But if you're talking about a book that is already complete and you're going to feed it to me in little chunks, that won't work for me. I'd rather download the audiobook and listen to it while I'm driving my 35-40-minute drive to work in the morning. That fulfills me better than reading a complete book in little 15-minute chunks, or not 15-minute chunks. I'm confusing it with the other story, but the chapter at a time. I can get through it faster. But if it's serialized and I'm actually waiting week to week to find out what happens next, I love the whole concept of that.
Well, you made a good point. Eventually, you're not going to know whether this was published weekly in the Rooster format or whatever it will eventually end up being called by whatever publisher. It's kind of like the next book that we're going to be reading on our podcast, which wait till the end of the podcast to find out, our hardcore science fiction pick coming up. But we won't know how it's published down the road. We'll just know it was a great book, and they'll sell it to you as an audiobook. Trust me. They'll make more money in that market. And so it's just another evolution and another way technology is helping, introduce new audiences to good fiction, good literature. So it can't be a bad thing overall. And speaking of introducing readers to new fiction, there's yet another award out, this one in the UK. The winner of the first Folio Prize is George Saunders for his book 10th of December, which is a collection of short stories about very real, very hard to deal with issues in society. And this is an award that just came out, and it's kind of a counterpoint, or kind of a different take than another popular UK prize, the Man Booker. So the Man Booker recently got criticism because they talked about if you want to be considered for the prize, you should make your entries light and breezy, basically, which was kind of reading between the lines for dumb down your work and not really serious type of literature. That's kind of what the article in the Guardian basically broke it down into. So George Saunders, his winning this award, and me taking a look at what the work was about, might not fit into our podcast, but it's definitely something. It's not dystopian future type literature. It's just real issues that we deal with today, like violence and violence against women and other things. And they're short stories that kind of are an introspective look at who we are and how we treat each other. And pretty dark, and like I said, right along my line, and definitely not made for the Man Booker Award.
You keep calling him a man hooker? No, I got you.
Booker Award. It's a weird name.
Booker. Hey, I tell you what, and this isn't really a comment on the actual award, but I felt like in college in school period, high school, college, whatever, you're always going over the classics, and I only had a few classes, or one or two, really, maybe not even a few, where we actually covered modern literature. I mean, I'm always on this hunt to find modern literature, but I don't feel like anybody is out there defining what is actually modern literature. Or, better said, a book comes out, it's a great book, and you wonder, do the critics define this as actual literature the way we would define Moby Dick as literature? And I wish we had more of that, where I actually knew what was in the category of actual literature versus just a story, or just a fiction, or just a novel. So
that's a good point. No, that makes me think of the series Song of Fire and Ice, better known as Game of Thrones, which is the first book in that series, and the fact that people compare that to J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which is beloved worldwide. And I've read Song of Fire and Ice series, and it's phenomenal. So maybe when you get enough of a following, I don't know if popular fiction will automatically put you in the category of, the history books as literature that will be read for future generations, but it's certainly an indicator. And so, following, I hate to say it, crowdsourcing people's opinions. We talked about crowdsourcing people's talent earlier to make money off of them, but really kind of take a look at what's popular that resonates with people in a certain day and age. Why does it resonate with people? Is that going to be relevant in the future, like Shakespeare or J.R.R. Tolkien? And I just threw out those two names randomly. I don't know if any literary historians would take issue with that. So yeah, good question, good point. But I will say right now that I don't think that we're going to be seeing Leviathan, our book that finishes up the podcast for episode 6, is going to be considered one of those classics, only because as good as the action was and as phenomenal as the world building and the revisionist history of the First World War was for this book, there were too many questions left unanswered, and we'll get to those. But we're going to focus on the great characterization, the great build-up, and the relationship building, and the great kind of unexpected twist and action that take place that result in a harrowing, narrow, death-defying escape from a frozen wasteland where much of the story is set in the latter part of the book, and where we see people having to make tough decisions about alliances, about friendships, and about betrayals and secrets. All of it sounds pretty good for fodder for Game of Thrones, but there is no real danger. No one dies in every other chapter.
Everything happens in the nick of time.
The nick of time. Yeah, now that you said that, that's a motif throughout this. It's like, oh, wait, the engines, they are working. Yes, finally. Whew.
Oh,
and we really only had 20 minutes left to fix them.
You got to wait on that, because I am going to rail on that particular issue in the book. But let's get there. Oh.
So where we left off last time, John, was when the family, Alec's family, was coming to save him, and Alec is really cagey about who that family is. He's trying to. He basically can't sit here and let the cat out of the bag that he is the Archduke's son, because he's become a prisoner of war, and he doesn't want basically death and destruction to be over his head. So he's kind of not giving people any indication of who his family is. Thank goodness Dr. Barlow, our boffin or scientist on the ship, kind of figures out he's important, and which I love. I love the whole, throughout the rest of the book, she seriously, it's kind of unfair. She's the super smart adult who's picking on this 16-year-old kid, or basically conning him to kind of reveal who he is. So that was kind of
she's the best character in the book, in my opinion.
Dr. Barlow?
I loved her dialogue, and I loved reading about her.
Yeah, Dr. Barlow was cool, but the more I looked at it, it's kind of insidious how she conned this kid and prompted him to reveal all this information that he was internally struggling with. So he wouldn't fall apart after losing his parents, but that's kind of secondary. The main crux of the book is figuring out how to escape the valley. So right now we figure out the Walker is coming. So it's kind of fun. Where we pick up is where they take up a Huxley, one of the fabricated animal hot air balloons, into the sky, and they're scouting from the sky. More specifically, Darren, our young, impulsive, brash jarhead, I would call her. She's up in the sky, and she sees the Walker coming. So it's fun, and really fun for me to see that whole scene where she sees this glinting metal sprinting across the snow, and she's like, what is that? And so it's kind of like when worlds collide, the whole cultures, she's obviously not used to seeing clankers, and she's kind of freaking out, waving her flags to the ground crew, and she sends off her little half-frozen lizard to send details of the approaching enemy, because this thing is going to basically catch them unprepared. So there's a whole cool scene right there, John, and I don't know if you want to talk about her decision, what happens next.
Which was almost all pointless, by the way, and I need to break this into two parts, because I had two serious issues, and one of them is with Darren as the character, the other is with Scott Westerfeld as the writer, and in this particular scene where she goes up on the Huxley, this is where I have an issue with Scott Westerfeld. And before I rail on anything, everyone really needs to understand I enjoyed the action in this book. This was a page turner for me. I really enjoyed it, but I was picking up on a lot of plot holes and and things that I just thought should have been done better. So she goes up in the balloon, which wasn't authorized at the time. The captain is speaking, and she runs to the Huxley, and she shoots up in there, and which is completely rude, okay? And in the real military, there would have been hell to pay for that. So she goes up, and she sees it. So okay, well, it worked out because she sees the walker coming, and she signals down. The thing is, I think about the time she picked it up is coming towards them, everybody on the ground could kind of see it too. It was the metal was glinting in the distance. So anyway, yeah, she sends the lizard down to tell everyone that it was the Habsburg. It had the Habsburg seal on it, okay, on the chest. And
she saw that. I'm sorry.
You really think
she called Alec a bumrag? She said, "Alec, you bumrag."
Right.
You're as Swiss as a piece of Swiss cheese or something, and I was like, okay, this is getting goofy.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I didn't think that was goofy. Well, it was, but do you really think binoculars in the early 1900s were good enough to pick up an image on a breastplate from something that is way off in the distance, and she can clearly see what it is? I called garbage on that. Then she sends the lizard down. Okay, she's already waved the flags. There's something coming. It's a walker, and she spells that out. And so she says, "Oh, the lizard's not going to make it in time." After she figures out the seal on the breastplate, she goes shooting down the rope. She gets down there just to find out that everybody has really already kind of seen it coming anyway. And then she tells them it's the Habsburg. Quite frankly, that doesn't matter at all at that point in the book. What crest or what seal is on the breastplate of this thing? No one cares. It doesn't matter. The fact is, it's a war machine. That whole scene to me was pointless. She could have stayed right there on the ground. They would have seen it coming anyway, and they would have prepared for it, because by the time she was sliding down the rope, everybody was running around preparing for it, and I just felt like her actions in that whole scene, Scott Westerfeld made them to be pointless. If you were to go back and rewrite it, everything should have hinged on her seeing it, and everything should have hinged on her identifying that was the Habsburg seal. But when I read it, none of that mattered. It was just action for the sake of action almost. If she had to go open the Huxley. And anyway, I'm railing on it too much now, so I'll turn it back over to you, Josh.
No, I don't remember the detail of the crew singing at the same time, but it was interesting that how impulsive she was. She's like the good little soldier, but she oftentimes is just kind of without thinking, just going full throttle.
Yes, without thinking.
And her making the comment, I meant to say she called Alec a bumrag and said he's about as Swiss as blue cheese is, because Swiss cheese is Swiss, but blue cheese is not. But that is a quote that is kind of a foreshadowing of the same type of banter that we get to see to come, and that's an issue down the road, because she throws up these little one-liners, and it kind of fleshes out her character, and not necessarily in a good way. But basically, her impulsive decision in the Huxley is to run down the zip line, and she's it kind of I thought was interesting for her to test her skills and see if she had enough air sense to figure it out on her own, and it kind of tries to make her the hero. She has all these adventures, and she's this spunky little Darren. So the more characterization of Darren, the more we see of her. I got to admit, she's not my favorite character, only because we don't see the relationships. We see her as an individual, the spunky little kid, and she doesn't really kind of mesh with the other crew and with the other main character, in my opinion. But that's the character.
You just reminded me the other thing that really made me mad about that scene. She comes down the zip line, and when she hit the membrane of the Leviathan, she punched another hole in it, and so it started leaking hydrogen again. And then you found out that everyone saw the thing anyway, and no one really cared what seal or what crest was on the breastplate. And I said, you just slid down this thing for no reason, punched another hole in the Leviathan, so it's leaking more hydrogen, and for nothing, just for nothing. So
actually, you know what? Thinking about it, I'm looking back and going over the actual chronology. What she did accomplish, she accomplished. If you want,
early alert.
It was an early alert, but maybe, Count Volgar, who's coming to the rescue, he might not have opened fire, but he might have seen the initial defense that the crew was making, the Leviathan and the crew, and he might have actually tried to open fire, and that could have blown him high sky. Who knows how much hydrogen was still in the air. So when she hits the Leviathan, she tucks and rolls, and then she runs and she says, "Alec, come with me." And then, do you remember? She runs. This is like a scene from Star Wars for me, the whole Hoth scene. I keep on going back to Hoth, and I'm like, she's running. I can imagine all the little rebels on the ground, running around with the AT walkers coming, and they're setting up their defense. Come on, it's like a complete ripoff. But she runs through the minefield or the whatever booby traps they set up. It is kind of unbelievable, and like I said, a little brash and impulsive. And she does the same thing she does to Alec earlier when they meet, and she takes him prisoner. She takes him prisoner a second time. She holds a knife to his throat out there in between her and the crew and the walker. Great illustration, by the way, of this part, but that's the only great thing about it, because she's sitting here bargaining with Alec, and she doesn't even have a plan after that. So Alec is more annoyed than scared, which I think is really funny and makes me want Scott Westerfield to write more about this from Alec's viewpoint, because again, at this point, Darren is just kind of bumbling through this whole thing.
Out of control is what I would say. And I have to interject here again, and I know I'm eating up more time than I should be talking about this, but let's break that scene down for a minute. This week's breakdown of the worst scene in the book, okay? Yeah, she runs out there in front of the British defenses, holds a knife at his throat, standing between them and the walker. And in her mind, and I think Westerfeld wants you to think that she's made this big decision and she's going to be a hero. But here's the bottom line. There are all sorts of people in charge on the Leviathan. There's officers, there's your senior enlisted people, all the people who have been doing this for years, who have been making a plan on how to deal with this massive walking machine coming at them. And now she's taken the prisoner on her own, run out in the middle in front of all of them, messed up their whole plan. She is not even considering the fact that this could spark an international war. There are political implications.
Too late.
There's all these things that the officers or the senior enlisted people of the Leviathan are taking into account as they are making the decision on what to do. And you got this airman who's only been, or a midshipman, whatever she is. She a sailor or an Air Force person, I never could tell. But she's taken it upon herself, and she's only been in the service for a month and a half, to run out in front of everyone and hold a knife at this kid's throat. And I'm thinking, oh my word, what is she doing? And I have a very unique perspective on that. But having said that, after that scene was over, I said, all right, I'm waiting for the repercussions of that action. And you know what? No one did anything about it. I don't know of any leadership in their right mind that would let the lowest of the enlisted people do something like that and not destroy them as soon as it got resolved. She screwed up everything. Now, Westerfeld made it work out, but in real life, that's not going to happen. She should have been thrown in the brig and locked up there for the rest of the book, and it would have been a better story.
You are right.
That's my rant.
That would have been an awesome turn of events that you wouldn't have seen it coming. Little spunky Darren, who's sitting here and kind of the hero who captures this kid and does all this other stuff that supposedly she can do, because you're right, she's young and she's a midshipman that's brand new, so she can kind of get away with it. It services the story, but she should have been thrown in the brig. And you do have that unique perspective since you're a two-time war vet, so you can completely break down the fact that even though Scott Westerfield probably characterized her very well, is kind of this gung-ho, do it for king and country type character, but he completely just serves as the story and trying to build the relationship between these two and ignores. I think this might start to be the beginning where he just ignores the larger kind of context of what I expected to be, big battles and big life and death decisions. But it is young adult fiction, and I'll take the hit for actually recommending this book.
No, it's a good recommendation. I had to rail on that particular scene. So
we love the book. We just don't like the fact that it we'll talk in the end how exploitive, how it exploits our expectations and leaves us hanging. So, but Count Volger, he does what any rash, or not rash, but kind of adult would do in this situation. And he out of his years of experience, he comes out and he says he'll go negotiate. So this is where the real negotiations start talking. Like you said, that whole scene kind of happens, it fizzles out, and it kind of just segues into how Count Volger and Alec are trying to infiltrate the Leviathan and figure out what these guys are going to do, basically, because he has to get Alec back to safety. So the cool thing is, in the negotiations with the captain and with our favorite character, Dr. Barlow, they're trying to manipulate the British, and they're trying to use German, and they make a trade to where Alec is no longer a hostage. Count Volger is, and he negotiates through Alec. He pretends he doesn't know English, and it's a very fun way to kind of show some real wargaming in between some very intelligent characters. Some of my favorite in the book, like you said, Dr. Barlow and Count Volger, and so Alec is no longer a hostage. Count Volger is going to spy on them and see if he can figure out what they might reveal while they're talking English. But then they have to get an exchange hostage since Volger is going to stay on the airship. And so the the Austrians take Dr. Barlow back in their Stormwalker. And she has a cabin boy. I think her name is Darren. Basically,
Westerfeld just kept on sticking her in the book, didn't he? She should have been in the brig.
She should have been in the brig at this point, and because Dr. Barlow is so high maintenance, she gets to come along, and she just I told you earlier, just her kind of her dialogue and her kind of just everything she says is almost comedic at this point. It's like a comedy. And right here, where they're going back to get supplies, and what the negotiation was, supplies for food for the Leviathan, and they go back to the castle to get all these rations. Dr. Boffin's the best person to do that, and they bring along Spunky Brewster, or whatever her name is, and she's making all these random observations like, yeah, this walker's awesome, it's like a giant iron rooster, and she's just at this point annoying. I wanted a lot more from her. I wanted that at this point. You think, okay, good, maybe the relationship between her and Alec will pick up, which is what the book should or maybe kind of hints at, but all the things that she does, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be any focus on that relationship. And so I'm kind of at this point, even though I like the book, I'm not liking the character, and I like the playfulness, the cat and mouse game between Alec and Dr. Barlow more about how much information does she reveal. And it's funny because she reveals that she was playing the exact same game that Volger was. She can speak German very well. She can read it and speak it, and so she's spying on the Austrians and getting as much information out of them as Volger is trying to get out of the British. So that is infinitely more interesting. They're at the castle now.
Something that popped out during that scene where Darren keeps going back and forth with Alec about, is a machine better, is a beastie better. I found that to be really funny because she keeps saying all the beasts are better, the Darwinist animals are better than the machines, and I couldn't help but notice that their big flying contraption, the Leviathan, although it can heal itself, okay, although it is a living, breathing thing, they still had to have motivator engines to actually push that thing forward. So even though they may think they have this superior beast, it still required engines of some sort to fly through the sky. And at the end of the day, all they have is a glorified Zeppelin. That's really all it is. So that whole debate, whether the beasts were better or the machines were better, it was funny to me. And Darren kept talking about the beast can figure out where to go, and but the thing with the beast is, and they haven't mentioned it about the Leviathan later in the book, is you can't, once it's made up its mind, it might go in the direction you're steering it, but you're not going to be able to dictate its every footstep and that could be an issue during a time of war or battle when the beast is going the direction you want, but you really needed to avoid that mine. But you can't control its every footstep pretty much. So there was a bunch of debate. I thought that was interesting because that was a big theme in the book. Were Darwinists better or were the Clankers better?
Yeah, and they didn't explore
the technology kept coming up. So
they didn't explore that thoroughly. You're right. It was another big tease. It was another motif. It's like, are we going to find out? Is there going to be a big battle where you actually see, I guess, the collateral damage of war and them actually fighting head on? And there is by the nature of the book, the Leviathan's an airship, and so it never has to do a ground battle, and it definitely outmaneuvers all its opponents. But it was a funny dialogue between those two, and that was good. I think the Clankers won in that conversation because I think the trains were fast, but they had to stay on rails, which is why Darren didn't buy into that. She basically said, well, our beasties can go anywhere they want to. So basically that was a funny dialogue. And but the comedy show that really is the centerpiece of the next part of the book is when they're at the castle and they get their supplies and they're leaving. Basically, the Germans they do a probing attack. The Leviathan is defenseless, and 2 Zeppelins come in, and they're Condors, I think they call them, which is a lightweight, fast Zeppelin with commandos that can like airdrop, zipline, repel out. I'm trying to think of what they call it in the Army. What do they call it when you're in a helicopter and you zip line out of the helicopter?
Air assault.
Is it air assault? It's been a while. Couldn't remember what that was called. So basically, there's Darren. They make a decision. Klopp, who's the Austrian mechanic, tells Alec, "We're not going to interject. We have to hide you. You're the future ruler of the kingdom." And it's just kind of an easy cop-out explanation, where Darren clunks Klopp on the helmet with her dagger and says, "We gotta help. The Leviathan's defenseless." And so she's just obviously thinking of her self-interest, but it's just kind of like this little spunky kid who's interjecting in these adult conversations, and she's like, "We gotta go." And so Alec agrees with her, and then there's the whole thing about cutting loose the huge payload they have, all the food that they were gonna haul back. And Darren, she has to jump out with her huge axe. She tucks and rolls. She's sitting here hacking away at the chains, and then they're at the edge of a slope, and the slope, after the chains are released, it whips back. She ducks, and then she's like, "Okay, I'm in the clear," but then the food starts to slide, and then she has to jump on, and she's going to crash into the Stormwalker, and they have to do this gambit where they figure out, let's time the Stormwalker's for momentum, let her jump onto the swinging ladder. She's not going to die. This has never been done before, and she's going to make it. And so the whole thing is a giant comedy show to me.
And the whole time, all I really want to hear about is what's going on at the battle near the Leviathan. Not really watching this girl that's supposed to be the same age, more or less, as Alec, who can't act nearly as maturely as he can, which I think Westerfeld did her a disservice as a character in that regard. But yeah, all I really wanted to hear about was the battle. Instead, she's hacking chains. Like you said, she's jumping, combat roll, whatever.
We do get there, though. Thankfully, that is such a short scene. I mean, I think it was a chapter or two, and maybe it was longer than I remember. but the Condors, they basically set down some heavy machine guns, and they are what we find out. These guys are not inept, and they do take the Leviathan under siege. They could actually destroy the Leviathan. But at this point, the Germans still want to capture the Leviathan, find out what makes these. This is a pretty impressive capture that they can catch one of the biggest warships in the British Air Service. So they destroy the engines. But here comes the Stormwalker, and Alec does the combat is what I want to see, like you. And so they mow down a couple of these Germans, and they.
Great scene.
It was good. It was quick, but it was basically trying to get to them before the Germans with their heavy machine gun could acquire them as a target, because I think the machine guns could do some damage to the Stormwalker. So that's kind of a real tense scene. Will Alec make it? I mean, he's taking a gambit, so it was a great scene. And then there's as is happens in war. You can tell us better than I, John, but the fog of war ensues, and I can't remember all the sequence of events. But at the very end, they take down one crew, they scatter the other. The Germans are in retreat, but the Stormwalker, they basically get caught in this giant what is it?
It's a bombing. They got bombed.
They got bombed, and the Stormwalker goes down. You're right. It's kind of this slow motion. The British are trying to protect themselves, and the bomb goes off, and it basically crashes the Stormwalker, which we find out is beyond repair. So you think this important defense they have in this clanker Stormwalker is going to continue, but that is seen its last action. But Alec jumps out, and this is the best part right here. Alec jumps out in front of the Habsburg seal. He's in full view, and he's trying to figure out what's happening now. He's just, I guess, his adrenaline is rushing, and the Zeppelin sees him. And the guys on top of this Zeppelin, they basically want him dead still. They want to capture Leviathan, but they want to kill this Austrian heir to the throne. And they start, they basically put their machine gun on him, start shooting at him. He thinks he's dead meat, and this is where the Zeppelin pretty much just goes in a ball of flames. And they did not follow Fire Safety 101 because it had already been damaged. Hydrogen was leaking, and again, you talk about basically Westerfield doesn't adhere to any good common sense in combat. They basically should have known better than to shoot their guns from the top of their Zeppelin, because they go up pretty quick. Alec is saved, but Volger is unhappy with this kid, and that's pretty much the end right there.
Yeah, I would think that anybody, especially the Germans, if you have an airship that is run by hydrogen, why only the British? Why did they only have air guns? Why not? Right. Why not the Germans? Yeah, that really didn't make sense. It served a good purpose in the book, and I thought that whole scene with the Stormwalker attacking was paced very, very well. The action didn't go on forever. He fired, things blew up, people got thrown, people died. I thought it was really cool when the paratroopers, well, not the air assault soldiers, the Germans, they were landing these large cannons that could take out a Stormwalker. And I thought it was a pretty neat scene when Alec charged them after they shot, and he basically stomped and smashed them. Yeah, and it was paced really well. He wasn't just expending a bunch of ammunition, just blazing the glory or whatever. It was pretty strategic. He was attacking, and he did a great job. It was a good scene. I really enjoyed
the strongest parts of the book. These are the strongest parts of the book, and they are in service to advancing the characters and what decisions would they make. So honestly, this is put at the forefront, and then we kind of are taken back to the actual plot of the story, which I think we will see that it basically kind of fizzles out the whole secrets to what's going to happen with the eggs. Oh my goodness, our precious cargo, how do we get back in the air? The Stormwalker is wrecked. So there's kind of these segues back to the plot, and we get to Volger, who's again, him and Barlow are my favorite characters, I think, next to Alec, because Volger is extremely upset. He tells Alec, he kind of gives him an ultimatum. He says, you find a way to go with the British, and you get out of here, or you sit here and you die with us, because the Germans will come back. One of the Zeppelins got away, and Stormwalker is wrecked, and they got to figure out how to get to Leviathan. The food is still there. They're going to get the Leviathan back in the air, and so we find out that there's a plan. After this whole scene, they got to figure out how they're going to get out of there. So they're going to free float to France, basically. And Alec understands their predicament, that the engines are shot in that attack. The engines got blown to Kingdom Come, and they're going to free float if they can catch a good headwind. But then Alec actually thinks on his toes, and he says, okay, Dr. Barlow needs engines. I have something to barter with her. Basically, she can ferry out me and my crew if I give her this Stormwalker engine. So it's kind of good thinking on his toes. After this whole time, he feels out of his depth, and I thought it was great characterization. It showed that he might be coming into his own. And I would have, and it might be appropriate at this point in the story, but we don't know if he does come into his own. Bottom line is this story. We keep on hinting at it, but this story just ends all too abruptly. And at the end, we see that he's made some good decisions, and this one is one of the best ones. He's bartering with Barlow. He's like, we'll give you our engines, you take us and you drop us off. So if we land somewhere, we get away before we're taken as prisoners of war. And so Barlow convinces the captain to do this. But at this point, she also figures out who he is, because he's saying, my crew will listen to me, and she kind of puts the pieces together. That he's this Austrian heir to the throne.
Well, now we're coming up on another plot hole in the story here, and I need to mention, and I'll come back to this in a second when you get to it. But the walker could have been put back in action, but it had to be picked up. No one could pick it up. One of the legs was twisted up pretty bad, but Klopp could have fixed it, and they basically were discussing how they would need the Leviathan to actually pick it up and put it back on its feet, and that way Klopp could actually fix it and put it back in action. So there was nothing available, and really not even the Leviathan was going to be able to pull that off. Okay, I mean, it could have lifted it, but they had no way to direct the Leviathan. They had no way to keep it at a level where they could actually cut the ropes after they get it lifted. So I've said that. We'll come back to that in a minute. So you were talking about Dr. Barlow bartering with Alec to get the engines.
Right. Where's the plot hole?
So I'll push ahead here. They end up taking the engines, and they actually, and there's two plot holes here. They put the engines on the Leviathan. The barter goes through. Okay, they agree, and now Alec and his crew are going to fly with the Leviathan, and the British are continuing their mission to Constantinople. And when they get to Constantinople, the agreement is Alec and his crew are going to just disembark wherever they land and run off before they're turned into anybody, and they're going to get away from the Germans. The plot hole here is, if it was going to take an entire airship to lift the Walker off the ground to get it back on its feet, how in the heck did they get two engines off of the Walker and put them on the Leviathan? I didn't see a crane show up anywhere.
Holy cow!
Engines weigh tons, and I'll bet for a Storm Walker those things probably weigh 2 or 3 tons apiece. I mean, think about your car engine. Who picked that up? Now I can pick up an engine block, not with myself, but with a few other people. We might be able to roll it. Who picked up 2 whole engines and put them on the Leviathan?
I think at this point in the story,
when did that happen?
I didn't care at this point in the story, and I totally missed that. You get the spoiler alert award for the week. Or not spoiler alert, but the plot hole award for the week. We need to actually have like a sign that says plot hole, plot hole, plot hole.
Pretty much.
Maybe we should cut our losses and say, okay, that's the book, that's a wrap. No, but you're right.
Wait, but there's one more plot hole. There's one more.
Uh-oh.
Okay?
Double whammy.
So they put the engines on the Leviathan, within a 24-hour period? Are you kidding me? These are 2 totally different types of engines. How did they just take an engine and within 24 hours adapt it to work on the Leviathan's propellers? I mean, think about if you tried to swap a Ford engine with a Toyota engine. Now, they might be similar in some regards, but it's not a plug and play. It's not like that. Wires would have been in different places, and you had to hook up propellers, and all sorts of weirdness had to be done. You're not going to do that in 24 hours, even with the master mechanic. It's going to take a couple of weeks. I mean, nope.
Good point.
You're not going to take a Panzer engine and put it in a Sherman. You could, but I don't think it's just going to happen in 24 hours. That's the other plot hole. But anyway, enough plot holes.
No, the plot holes that you just pointed out are extremely important because they're in service to the story, just to kind of get it done and get it going, because they've done all this exposition, and they've joined the cruise, and everybody's happy, and we think we're going to get out alive, and this is our way to do it. So you're right. After that, the brilliant thinking and strategizing on Alec's part, they say, hey, ignore this plot hole. And you know what? I think we should also have an award for totally pointless plot point. Because the book, which I thought at the beginning was going to be your classic young adult fiction and kind of characters that you care about, and you hope that in their, Romeo and Juliet kind of tragic, coming together and will they or won't they make it, that never happened. But the totally pointless plot point that happens here at the end of the book is when Darren comforts Alec after Dr. Barlow does figure out who he is, and he totally breaks down, and he's crying, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know. He doesn't want to basically, I don't know, keep going. I don't know if that's a way to describe it, but basically Darren gets a little bit of a crush on him because he hugs her. So that one scene where she gets the hug and it gives her a tingly feeling is totally pointless because they bring it up one more time in the book and there is absolutely no follow through at the end of the book because she's a soldier. She has no time for this stuff. But they bring it up anyway as what? A teaser? As kind of a, like,
read
this
the
is
next
where
book.
we're going. The next book, huh? What? There's a next book. So basically, totally pointless plot point. And so I'm not sure where, what other things are significant to point out in the personal relationships, because the big finale or the big climax comes up when the 8-legged enemy walker, the Hercules, that was on the border of Switzerland that they bypassed, and it finally catches up with them. And not just that big monster. Behind them, they find out after they get the engine started in the nick of time, and you have the clanker technology working, and they start to race down the hill, and they see the 8-legged walker, and they're going toward it. They're like, why? And basically, there's a full assault bearing down behind them with all these Zeppelins, German Zeppelins, and these little quick attack ships. So you're like, oh, okay. So lesser of two evils. So this is where it gets fun. This is where it gets interesting for me.
Except for one more plot hole.
No. Are you serious?
There's one more plot hole in this story.
All right, go.
It
what
was
is that?
killing me. It was killing me. Okay, so we find out that Vulgar has brought all the bars of gold on board the ship. So while Alec and Klopp were fitting the engines to the ship within a 24-hour period, Vulgar's traipsing back and forth between the Walker and the ship, and he's brought all the bars of gold on board. And they made up the weight of probably 3 grown men.
Right.
And in the book, as they're trying to gain altitude to get away from the what was it, a dreadnought, or I can't remember what the 8-legged walker was called, but they're trying to get away from it, and something's holding them down. They can't gain height, and so Alec goes down. He realizes there's bars of gold, and him and Vulgar start chucking bars of gold out the side of this ship. And I'm thinking, oh wow, that really stinks, losing all that gold. And then it occurred to me, the bars of gold, they said, weigh approximately about 3 grown men. So let's say 600 to 700 pounds. Okay. Didn't they lose like 20 men in the battle before the Leviathan crashed? Even with the bars of gold, they're still lighter than when they originally started the journey. What do you mean this thing can't gain altitude? They are still not as heavy as they were at their full manpower.
No, you forgot about those 8-ton engines.
World?
No, we're not going to do the math for.
They weren't that much heavier. Oh, that killed me. It killed me. Okay, anyway, that's it.
I didn't care at this point. At this point, I'm thinking that you have Star Wars Episode 1 where they're doing the pod racing, and you have this little Punky Brewster, and they're doing these little light engine pod racers. They just stick them on, and they're going to go. At this point, I don't care, because basically they just teased us with a developing relationship, and so I can't get past that. I'm seriously like, oh my goodness, you guys seriously talk about life and death situation, these guys come together. But we don't care at this point. I mean, who cares if she has feelings for Alec, to be honest with you?
Yeah.
And
there's no time to flesh it out.
And there's no point in just sitting here and saying, okay, or commiserating on basically all the plot threads they did not tie up. But the one thing is, he doesn't even find out she's a girl. So that's kind of an important thing. There's going to be no reciprocation here. He thinks he's a little dude. He's this funny kid who goes on adventures. So that he doesn't
even knives to my throat. Yeah, he loves knives.
Seriously, he doesn't find out she's a girl, and it's just kind of pointless. That makes it even more pointless. So at this point, I just want to see kind of a second act when the Zeppelin or when the Leviathan got into the aerial fight with the German airplanes. I want to see if they can top that. And to a certain degree, they do make it kind of a narrow escape, and it's good because, like you said, the pacing earlier with the battles. This is where Westerfield actually really shines. Mm-hmm. And so they're going down the valley. They're not gaining top lift or whatever you call it. The nose isn't going up, and we know earlier that if the hydrogen ignites, they're going to go up in a fiery ball of flame, and that's the end. And we know those phosphorus mortars that the scouts launch, and that the Hercules knows that they're going to launch, that we know they're going to launch, that's going to kill them. So we kind of see this narrow herring escape, and I find it fun, and I find the whole action sequence. I wish I did have kind of a visual to show us how they chunk everything over the edge, even all their defenses, the flechettes, they dump everything. And the best part about this scene is that the Hercules acquires them, and they're heading. It's like a game of chicken essentially, and then their acquired target, they're about to get killed. But I guess the British Air Service, it does have some air sense, and they show that they can outmaneuver these guns, and they dump something on the aft side, and they go starboard. They take a hard starboard, which is left or right, I don't know. And they basically they narrowly get hit by this phosphorus mortar from the giant Hercules, and I think it's awesome. And they start to gain the gold is gone, and then they have this whistle where everybody says go aft, and then they just hike it to the back of the ship. I know aft is back, and they actually barely get away, and it's a really cool scene. And I probably just chopped it up, and it probably didn't make sense if you weren't there, but I enjoyed it.
Same here. It was good.
That was the saving grace.
It was exciting.
The saving grace.
Well, I think all the battles were the saving grace. I mean, I pointed out plot holes and railed on them, and a lot of that's for fun, and I am serious, but it was exciting. It was an exciting end to the book. It really was. So.
What was your favorite part of the battle, though? Did anything? I mean, you broke down the earlier battles, so was anything that struck you? I kind of in broad strokes said here's what it was, but it was much more than that. It was a cool tactical maneuver, and they outdid the Germans, which the Germans brought a full assault, and that was kind of bite your nails kind of at the end there.
Yeah, well, there were two things that stuck out. One, the fact the Germans did bring so much with them the next time, because wasn't it pretty cool to see how much damage one Stormwalker could do? I mean, that one Stormwalker annihilated a Zeppelin and 2 commando crews, and that's nothing to stub your nose at. I mean, it annihilated them. The second thing is that in this last battle when they escaped, it was cool that Westerfeld's basically created a hybrid. You got clanker engines on a British airship, and they can go faster, actually. They can go faster than they did before. And they're supposedly a little heavier with the engines, like you pointed out, but they went much faster. And he really talked more about the cilia on the ship in that last scene, and how it was gliding the air around the membrane, and the Zeppelins couldn't keep up with that, and that kind of stuck out. Now they've got something that was better than what they had before, maybe.
You're right, and that's a really good point, John.
In the next book,
you've during the whole show, you've brought up the points of the book that we wanted to see more of. We wanted to see these. I talked about how good the world building was at the beginning. It's not fair to call the book just one giant exposition, but it is kind of a little bit of exposition sprinkled with this world building of what the possibilities could be. And you brought up some really good points about here are the best parts. Here's what it would look like in this world, and kind of the battles of what the larger world is facing. We have these two characters that are kind of figure themselves out and figure out their part in this bigger war, but we never see that bigger war. And so, and we get the good parts, and we've talked about those. But the biggest issue of the book is the giant exposition of whose people are, what's driving them, what the mission is, and with this new breed of warship, what's it going to do? It's going to allow them to do more things. It's not as helpless as it looks now, because it can probably outrun anything, and that's fun. But the very end, the book essentially ends there. We do find out that their agreement stands, and we're going to find out what happens in the Ottoman Empire. We're going to find out what these eggs are. But we don't, those questions and that plot point that drove the whole book, if you don't answer that question, to me, I think it's a cop-out. So I'm just going to segue right into the fact that I think it was a little exploitative for us to go down this whole, follow Westerfield down this path, this journey into this world, and not get some key questions answered and some key characterizations about these two kids, and are they going to, are we going to find out if she's a girl or not? That was another big one. And I just don't think it's fair that you can save that to the next book. I could be completely wrong. People can challenge me on that. But this is, I hate to say, marketization of his work. You have a publisher who says, well, we'll give you a book deal. It's a 3-book deal. Westerfield might be like, okay, I have to divide my one story into 3 books. That, again, someone could cry foul on that characterization, but I was not happy with the end and the cliffhanger. That wasn't a true cliffhanger. It was just, let's cut the book in half.
Yeah, I think this easily could have been a much longer book. It probably should have been for the first installment, because I think he's written a series here. I didn't actually look at how many books are in the queue. Despite any plot holes, which, caveat to that, are really unavoidable when you've got a new universe that you've created like this, which steampunk isn't new, but this particular story is new. And when you're trying to write a big action scene and you're getting your characters into these messes and now they got to get out of it, a plot hole is going to come up at some point. It's okay, The action scenes were great. I loved to watch Alec while he was in that big battle that he was involved in piloting the walker. Boy, he really kept his cool. I mean, he acted like he was already a trained soldier. Even when the bombs were coming down, he just tried to think about what to do next, and it didn't work out. But he didn't freak out, and it was kind of neat watching him. Overall, this was a good book. The character of Darren had too many issues for me to really like her at all, and I understand that he's trying to develop this love interest. But the difference between her and Alec and how they acted was so different in their maturity level that they did not. The love interest, I'm not really rooting for them to have that love interest, because I'm like, she's just like a little kid and you're a much more mature individual. It almost feels like he's 25 and she's 15 the way they're written, and that's not supposed to be how it is. But overall, I enjoyed the story. This would probably make a really good movie. Wish those plot holes weren't there, but maybe in a movie they could kind of clean some of that up a little bit. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good recommendation, Josh. It was a fun read.
All right, out of 5 stars, what do you give it? We're doing a 5-star scale.
3.5.
3.5. You're generous. I gave it a 3, but I should have given it a 2, because I don't think one little hug, constitutes a love interest, and the fact that he doesn't even know she's a girl. So no, I'll give it a 3, just because, again, from a storytelling standpoint, it is not a complete story, and you can start, and people can start throwing Rotten Tomatoes, and they can tell me read part 2, but no, it's probably not going to happen. I told the story to my son, and he's interested in finding out what happens. But we are done with Leviathan, and we're done with the Clankers and the Darwinists for now. If anyone wants to recommend the second part and tell us that the story has a satisfying conclusion, and we don't get some loose, like at least no more than 2 loose plot threads, then we could maybe one day finish off for our own reading pleasure. But next up, John, on the Reign of Book podcast is the Hyperion series. This is another series, and Hyperion is a pick by Dan Simmons. It's a hardcore science fiction book, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking hardcore in the sense that there are names, there are locations, there are people, there are plots that get so twisted and so wrapped around that you have to sit here and create a chart to keep up with all the characters. But that is not a bad thing. That's a real fleshed out world with real consequences and really good stuff. The actual book Hyperion, the description, it's on a world called Hyperion, and beyond the law of the hegemony of man, there awaits a creature called the Shrike. There are those who worship the Shrike. There are those who fear it. And there are those who would vow to destroy it. In the Valley of the Time Tombs, where huge brooding structures move backward through time, the Shrike awaits them all. And on the eve of Armageddon, with the entire galaxy at war, 7 pilgrims set forth on a final voyage to Hyperion, seeking the answers to the unsolved riddles of their lives, and each carries a desperate hope, a terrible secret, and one may hold the fate of humanity in his hands. That's the official description of Hyperion, and I was sold right there, and I've already started reading the book, John. It's going to be a great pick, and like I said, I think an epic pick. It's a Hugo Award-winning novel, which doesn't hurt. So I'm excited, and we're going to start that next week. We'll probably kick off Friday night. If not, at a regularly scheduled time on Fridays, we'll do the weekend show. So you'll at least have a weekend show for any live viewers. And we welcome all comments and suggestions. John, what do you want to hear from the readers who might want to follow along? What should they watch out for, or what would you tell them to do for this next book?
Oh, for Hyperion, this thing's going to be on the level of Dune and maybe even bigger. I think this is going to be a great read. Any plot holes you see, put them in there. Let's flesh them out, because sometimes you think you've got a plot hole and it turns out not to be a plot hole because the author ties up the loop later on. But we any correlation between what characters are doing in the book versus maybe some things that are actually going on in today's society. I love making those connections and drawing those lines. So anything you see like that, make some comments on it. Let's discuss that.
Super. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm excited about Hyperion, and we are going to sit here and find out if it's on the level of Dune, like you said. But this is hardcore sci-fi for any great fans of science fiction out there, which we hope you are, because you are listening to The Reign of Books, which is the reader's introduction into great narratives, and it's all about sci-fi and fantasy. John, it's been a pleasure. I'll catch you next week.